Thank you. It's really an honor to be here. As Peter said, we worked together for a long time. I think very highly of him. So it was a double honor to be recognized in the university and also to have Peter want to do this. So I'm grateful for that honor. I do have a few things I'd like to say about responsible leadership, but I find that most of them have been said by the people who've spoken before me. So we've been really well fed, got great ideas. I do have a couple things I would like to emphasize. The first one is that I think it's important for all of us who have any kind of responsibility to be a leader, and that includes pretty much everybody, because I believe in leadership with a small L. That is leadership that exists and is important at every single level of society, all the way down into individuals and families, but also in organizations, in project teams, in divisions, in any kind of group, all the way to CEOs and even people who lead large parts of societies. In every position of leadership, leadership is always and everywhere a moral act. Always and everywhere a moral act, because every leader takes the lives of other people in her or his hands and takes action in various ways that affect other people. And it is either for their well-being, to improve their lives and help them become more effective and more better off, or it hurts them. So it's always a moral act. So that's the first observation. The second observation is that all of us, whether you're in a school or not, will teach other people about responsible leadership. So all of you, no, it doesn't matter what you do, all of you will teach responsible leadership, whether you intend to or not. This is what we came to at HBS. So we thought hard about what should we do as an institution to develop leaders who go out and really make the world a better place. Not rhetorically, but actually make the world a better place. What should we do as a school? And we had to come to grips with the issues that have been raised today about, can you do that? You can talk about it, will it have any effect? And we decided that whether you choose to or not, you will teach people about responsibility. If you choose not to do it with intent, you will do it inadvertently. And you'll do it haphazardly. And they will learn about responsibility from you, but it won't be a happy lesson. You will teach them that you do not care about it, that it is not an important part of being a leader. And they will take that, and it will get into their hearts, because responsibility is always about the heart and the mind. Now, we've talked a lot about the heart today. It's very important. And I'm a firm believer that people can change. Actually, if you think about it for a little while, you'll realize that people change all the time. The issue is, in what direction will people change? How will people change in their lives? I mean, you think about it. Sue and I were talking about this the other night. We have several friends that we knew for long years, and we've watched them over time. And many of them today are very different than they were when we knew them. Very different. And they didn't change immediately after we knew them. They changed many years later. They became different. Now, we talked about it because many of them have been very unhappy in their lives, precisely because they changed in ways that fostered unhappiness. They became selfish. They became more interested in material things to the detriment of their families. They became more consumed by power than by doing the responsible thing. So we watched this happen. The evidence is clear. People change. The issue is, how are they going to change? in what direction. And schools have a significant influence on how people think about themselves, especially business schools, about their professional identity. Who are you? What do you stand for as a human being and as a leader? And so we chose at HBS to educate for responsibility. And it's not easy. It's kind of challenging. I want you to, because it actually is full of paradoxes. It's full of paradoxes. And I mean, we heard some of them tonight. When Charles was talking about Patagonia, talking about an organization that seeks to, that wasn't even founded in order to maximize any kind of economic value, and yet has created tremendous value. It's kind of a paradox. So how do you teach that? Well, one way you do it is you try to help the faculty understand something about these principles, which actually Kim talked about them. Trying to teach the principles, in fact, this goes back to Clay's theory, the theory that underlies what Kim talked about is not easy. So I want you to picture in your mind the Harvard Business School faculty. Okay? So keep in mind, I don't know what your image of Harvard Business School is, but your image probably understates the issue. Okay? Think of the Harvard Business School faculty, all right? Arrayed in a room. There's like 200 and something of them. The most prestigious business school in the world, populated by faculty of great international renown. Okay? All right, so I'm in there. I'm down in the bottom, and I'm talking to these people, all of whom got where they are by single-minded pursuit of their own interest. Do you have the picture now? And this is what I told them. It's a paradox about responsibility. This is what I told them. I said, all right, this is what I believe. If we together work in such a way that we are willing to invest in each other, even if it causes us individually to sacrifice our own interest, we will end up creating an organization that is so powerful in its influence and in its culture that individually we will end up better off than if we selfishly pursue our own interests. It's a paradox. It's a paradox. Because you have to believe that if I take time, if Peter shows up in my office and I'm working on a paper and I'm trying to write and Peter appears in my office door and wants to talk to me, I have to set that aside. I have to believe that by setting this aside and spending time with Peter rather than my own work, it will eventually create a culture that's very powerful and I will be better off someday. Only not this day. Right? I mean, that's exactly what you do. But I believe that. I believed it very strongly at HBS, and I believe it strongly now. We saw it begin to happen. One of the sweetest things that happened to me in my time at HBS was a letter I got. It was a letter from one of my colleagues who is an absolutely brilliant economist, internationally renowned, brilliant person, who grew up in a country different from either this one or the one we were in, where he saw people pursuing their own interests to the max. And he saw the consequences of it, and he learned that only the cynics survive. Only people who are ruthless and cynical survive. So when I started talking about, investing in other people, I'll be better off, he just thought that was complete nonsense. It's just kind of like, you gotta be kidding. I have a dean who is a complete naif. Just doesn't understand the real world at all. But I got this very sweet letter from him when I left. And he wrote me this long letter, and he said, when you first talked about all this stuff, I thought, this is nonsense. This is crazy. But as time went on, he said, I decided that I would experiment with it. And so I began to behave the way you taught us. And he said, I have to tell you, I am a convert. He said, I now believe what you believe because I've practiced it and I've watched the change it's made in my life. So it's hard, but it's very powerful. Responsibility, the way we're talking about here, is very powerful for exactly the reasons that Kim talked about. Now, I do have a couple of things I want to conclude with, because responsibility, while it's powerful, is not easy to do. It's not only about the heart. I mean, it's very much about the heart, about what do you stand for, about who are you, about your identity, about your principles. But it's also about the mind, because you cannot be a responsible leader if you are ineffective, if you don't know how to take action that's powerful and effective, or you don't know how to marshal others and organize and motivate people so that they do the things that bring about responsibility. I mean, if you think about what Charles talked about today, think about what it would take in a company to get a company to actually do the things he talked about. I mean, produce products that people like, appealing to a particular segment of a market, and yet build processes in that organization that effectively address those issues. What does it take to get 300 companies to sign up to play a game that's not in their interest? What does that take? It's more than heart. It's skill, it's knowledge, it's expertise. It's the kinds of things we teach about. In fact, I think you can argue that the real, I was going to use the word magic, but I don't like that word. It's not a good word for magic. The real, power in this is to get people who have responsible hearts and very powerful minds. William James, I think, developed the concept which has been deeply ingrained at HBS for a long time, which is he taught that what you want in leaders is someone who's tough-minded, but not hard-hearted. So you want responsible hearts, and you want strong, powerful minds. And you can see it. But there's another issue that I'd just like to share with you. If you, I'm going to use Charles's example. If you look at what he described, you have a situation in which a company's actions, its private actions, have social consequences that are not incorporated into the markets that it serves. They don't show up in market prices. And therefore, if they just behave in their private interests, they'll ignore all of the consequences of their behavior. But Patagonia chose not to do that. They chose to recognize where they have influence that extends beyond the boundaries of the firm, and then attempt to try to address that consequence that they have socially in a way that makes the people affected better off. I think it's fair. Okay, and that's we see that all the time. I mean, if you find firms that are trying to do this kind of stuff, that's what they're doing. But I would like to suggest there is a way to take that logic one step further. It doesn't happen, it doesn't work all the time, but there's enough evidence that it works some of the time that it's worth making it part of a leader's, I would call it, consideration set, if you will. What do leaders think about? It ought to be in there. So I'll give you one example. A leader that I have a lot of respect for is a man named Paul O'Neill. He was the CEO of Alcoa, big aluminum company. You guys call it aluminium, I think. Is that right, Dave? Yeah, either way, it works? Yeah. Anyway, metal. Very nasty business to make that metal. A lot of mining, a lot of smelting, a lot of metalworking. It's very, very dangerous. When Paul O'Neill became CEO of Alcoa regularly killed its own people and injured them on a regular basis. But their safety record and their health record was superior to the industry they were in. So given aluminum is dangerous, they were less dangerous than most aluminum guys, okay? But they still killed people a lot. This had consequences beyond the boundaries of the firm. I mean, you think about it. You know, you kill this worker. What does that do to his family, to the community? It's devastating. And you injure people. All the time they were injuring people. Now, I don't want you to get the feeling like there was, you know, in every plant every day somebody dies. It's not what it did. But, you know, occasionally during the year someone would die at Alcoa. And that was standard accepted practice in the industry. Well, Paul came in and he said, I don't think that's right. The only standard that has any standing is 0. So we are going to seek to have 0 fatalities and 0 injuries. Incredibly difficult to do. But the idea about taking it a little further than Patagonia is taking is to say, can we, by searching in this space, so this is a space in which there is failure, in which there is destruction of value outside the firm. By searching in that space, can we find not only ways to ameliorate the situation, but can we find ways to increase value actually in both segments, for the firm and for society? Because what happened in the O'Neill case is that they went after 0. And he was dogged. And he got a bunch of people convinced, he said, how can you accept anything other than 0? How can you say to a family, come work for us, and your probability of dying is only 0.04? Today. He says, it's unacceptable. And he taught that and taught it and taught it. What happened, though, was as they pursued 0, they began to discover things about their processes and about their systems and their information and communication and all sorts of things. And over time, it got lower and lower and lower and lower, the safety record. Fewer and fewer people died, less people were injured, significantly fewer, and Alcoa's processes got better because they began to discover things about their processes they didn't know. Now, someone could argue, someone trained like Peter in economics, which is actually what I was trained in, would say, well, they should have discovered that already anyway. These people who say that, they never ran a company. They never played that game. It's not that easy. In fact, what I think happens is when you see failure in that way, you see destruction of value in society, it's a signal to the firm. Here is a potential zone of opportunity for us to explore and see, can we find things that will add value in society, but also add value in the firm? It's not going to happen all the time, but it will be, I think, a powerful thing. One last thought. This is about Peter's systems. There's a recent paper by Rebecca Henderson and one of her colleagues, his name is Kartik Rana, who argue that leaders who are embedded in the kind of economic system we're all embedded in, where you have private enterprise and you have governments and you have kind of this mixed system that we have. Leaders in that world have a responsibility for the system. That is, there are times when it is justified for private individuals to take action to preserve the integrity and therefore the legitimacy of the system, even if it causes some short-term cost to their companies. The example they use is accounting standards. If accounting standards are manipulated by the participants, and the participants actually are involved in setting the standards, and then because of their knowledge of the standards, they can manipulate them to their advantage, that will cause eventually the system to collapse because no one will have any faith in it. And therefore, what will happen is there'll be regulation. And you know what happens when you get regulation? You get corruption. You get costs on the system. And eventually, it just starts collapsing on itself. Now, there's some, by the way, I don't have time to explain this all to you. This is actually what happened in Hitler's Germany. I'll leave that with you. You can reflect on it, okay? So, the point, I want to use an example that's not currently a huge problem. It's a medium-sized problem, but it's going to get a lot bigger. So to do that, I want to describe to you an episode that happened at a university, unnamed, not mine, not Peter's, not Clayton's, not Kim's, and not Charles, okay? Student comes into a teacher. Teacher has in front of her, it's a woman in this case, it's a professor, she has a paper this student wrote. And the paper is covered with blue highlights because the professor has run the paper through a software program that searches the internet for plagiarism. The paper is littered with whole paragraphs lifted from sources on the internet. The teacher shows the paper to the student and says, "What do you have to say?" And the student looks at her and he says, "I know." He says, he said, "I tried to get that blue ink out of the thing. I couldn't figure out how to do it. I know, isn't that tough? You know, look, I don't know what to do." And she said, no, you're missing the point. He said, "Why?" She said, "All this stuff is taken from other places. It's not your work." He looked at her with a blank stare and said, "So what? So what?" And she said, "Well, it's plagiarism." He said, So what?" He said, "You gave me an assignment. I give you a paper. What do you need? What else do you want?" And the student was serious. Okay, student's about 18 or 19 years old, turned in a paper basically lifted from the internet and thought that was fine. The student had a moral code that basically said, what's right for me is right. I want you to think about that for a few minutes. What's right for me? So whatever makes my life better, according to me, is right, morally right. Okay? There's a whole generation of young people out there who have this code. Whole generation. They're flooded with information. Their view is, you know, well, you have requirements, but they're sort of your thing, and I have to meet them, but I'm going to meet them however is best for me. And all your rules, I don't really care about your rules because they don't really apply to me. So that's how I'm going to be. Now you think about what that would be like if that moral code that is in a lot of what I would call the rising generation in the world, you take that moral code and imagine that's the code that is in the population. And that's the code that starts getting into the people who run organizations. Well, I guarantee you if that happens, the economy that you saw recently in the 2007, 8, 9 period will feel like a cakewalk compared to what will happen if that code takes over. Okay? So that's my prediction. Now, that means everybody, every leader, every person with any interest in a healthy, functioning, growing economy, I hope that's all of us, has a responsibility to counteract that moral code in whatever way you can, whether you're a teacher, a leader, in a firm, in a home, wherever you are, in families, in organizations, wherever. You need to recognize when it pops up, and you need to teach. And it won't help you to start by teaching them about the Old Testament. This will not be the most effective way to start. Okay? You might get to the Old Testament at some point, but it's not the most effective way to start. you can start by helping them see that by having that point of view and that moral code, they are headed to sure personal disaster. Because they are. Because no one will trust them. No one will believe anything they say, including the people they want to believe them. Think about it. That code destroys human relationships, destroys organizations, destroys families. It's a sure recipe for disaster because it's very short-sighted. And you can start there by teaching them it's in their interest to learn to tell the truth. It's in their interest to care about how other people feel. It's in their interest to think about the consequences 2 or 3 steps down of their behavior. So all of us have that responsibility. It's a good example of being a responsible leader, is to teach the paradoxes so that people understand. Well, I've gone on long enough. It's grateful to be with you. Look forward to questions and hope we'll get some. Thank you.